Welcome to the Demystify Technology podcast from the MacLaurin Group.
Typically, you go through the due diligence process. What's the world of private equity?
Right. Can't wait. Demystify it.
Well, we're back for our yearly review of the Stack Overflow developer survey, and we've got Mr. Milbery.
Hey, how the heck are you?
We're doing good. And we've got Ryan for the first time bringing his brand of stuff onto this.
Well,
Wow.
I'll try and live up to that expectation.
But
Just bring your stuff.
yeah, he clearly doesn't like you very much, Ryan, to suck you into this. Boy, wow. What project did you screw up to get assigned to this?
I don't know. I'm trying to remember my morning now.
This is like the latrine duty of the MacLaurin Group.
Right. So this was a big one. This is 65,000 respondents. I mean, they opened up this one big.
Well, so the first thing to me was, is it me or did they fancy up the HTML CSS?
Well,
Woo!
somebody has spent some money on BI.
Yeah, I mean, because last couple of years, it's looked a little, it sort of looked like the original Google, like a texty, like loaded for speed. This year, they got super fancy, man. I got to tell you.
Yeah, and our own Jim Headley, who's a sucker for a good widget. I mean, he was clicking through here, getting quite excited.
Yeah, I won't go that far. As I open it up in a separate browser window here, so I can keep all of us boys and girls meeting together here. This is me rearranging my desktop.
So one of the things I did notice straight off the gate was that the vast majority of respondents were from Europe, not the US. So
Yeah.
That was good. Right. So
Wait. What do you mean it was good? Like, oh wow, because opinions from people in the U.S. are.
I was just gonna let that one go.
Yeah. No, I know you were. I thought that one go. I know you were gonna let that one go. Wow.
You want to pull at that thread? Okay. So Ryan, what did you spot that was a?
I think there's a number of different ones, but I think one of the ones was which I mean, you've seen this year after year, is there's still a majority of people calling themselves full stack developers. That was interesting. It seemed like the vast majority, you're either a full stack developer or a backend developer. Those are the two major camps that people are falling into, which I guess kind of makes sense because I feel like a lot of backend developers, it's a little bit easier to transition to full stack because all you got to do at that point is say, yeah, I could do a little bit of JavaScript and HTML. Whereas I feel like taking on the load of a database and a server is a little bit more effort to get that knowledge.
Ryan, what I would do is I would privatize your Twitter stream and any social media because that kind of comment is going to get the UI fanatics.
The good news is I'm not on any of those.
Really?
So.
Oh, really? The front end is way, I think Simon is going to want to have a few words with you about the degree of difficulty on that. So full stack is we talked about this before. We've been on a bunch of different podcasts talking about this. I mean, you either, look, I get it. If you're a small company and you can only hold, you can't afford to hire 10 people, getting somebody who knows back end, middle tier, client side, just to get an application out. Yeah, it makes sense. But I've never found a developer, or I shouldn't say it's never, it's rare that you get a developer who's good at all three layers of the stack, in my opinion.
They're usually deep in one.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say jack of all trades, master of none, but there's a lot of full stack developers that would fall into that category. But after a period of time, they do sort of logically or naturally migrate to one specific area and go a little bit deeper in that specific skill set.
Yeah, I would say that would you agree with this, that what I've seen when we look at stuff is the layer that people think they know that they don't is the database.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
I mean, even things like, joins is relatively simple, two where tables, etc. But when you start getting into right joins, left joins, inner joins, you've lost a lot of people at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because, let's say and we're hitting the I guess the most popular language is JavaScript. Right?
No surprise there.
Yeah, so if you know JavaScript, you could write the client layer, you could write the server layer, Node, or pick your favorite, but you can do it at the client and app server level, and then and then there's the database. Like it's the what do they call it? The redheaded stepchild. Is that the old Scottish slur? Redheaded stepchild. That they just. So that's what we found most of the time when we have big performance problems these days. It's because the database part of it is query optimizer, indexes, joins, data types. Let's make everything text 255 so much easier, because then we can use a loosely typed language to grab it all, right?
Yeah. And that's before we even get into the notion of indexing. We had one client that clearly read the book a little bit too much and indexed every single column in every single field and in every single table. And we wondered why the database was choking every time there was an update.
Wow.
We've seen your I/O problem.
Yeah. Delete star from index where. So go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say, speaking of the databases, it's comforting to see that MySQL and Postgres are still the two top big hitters.
Yeah. So I was starting on the tab. So I was starting on the tab with language, right? I'm going to keep shrinking you guys in my little window here so I can see you both at the same time. I'm multi-windowing. JavaScript number one, not surprising. I mean, the thing about the language that drives me nuts is, so you've got, JavaScript, which is a real programming language. I mean, you can make, we could criticize it, whatever. Loosely typed, which drives me nuts. But okay.
And I have become more of a favorite of it. There was historical podcasts on this very subject.
No, I know you've gone over to the dark side, but I still, when you get, if you get panicky and you run home to mama, you're writing Java. I know that. So
Ryan's at that sniffy stage at the moment where he's just refusing to play with the new toys. He's like, I just want to do this in Java.
Right. Well, there's something. Look,
you can drag me kicking and streaming, but let me kick and scream.
Yeah, I mean, so the problem here is it's mixed. So JavaScript is, it's a real programming language, but HTML, CSS,
no,
it's not. So in the if you look at the top 10, they've got HTML, CSS, SQL in third, and then Python and Java, again, two real languages. Then Bash, Shell, PowerShell. Now,
one fancy script file does the programmer not you make.
Right. Now, to be fair, I always have a small little tear in my eye that you wrote a system and using a Bash shell. There's something about that brings a little joy to my heart from poor man's DevOps, right? And then C#, PHP, TypeScript, again, not a language really.
It's more of a formality above JavaScript, but
and then C++, C, Go, Kotlin, Ruby, Assembly, VBA, Swift, which interesting. Swift has overtaken Objective-C, but it's still 6%. So when you look at the tail comes off pretty far there, right?
I'm surprised to see Ruby not as much as it was. I still keep bumping into a lot of Ruby, but 7%.
Yeah, I bump into it. It's interesting to know. Have you watched the not to digress, but the war between Apple and the guys at Basecamp?
Yes, I've been hearing that on the Pivot
DHAs is been going crazy, whatever. But it's so they wrote their own email client and server with a proprietary protocol. No IMAP, no POP. Sure, I'll try that. Yeah, sure. That sounds like a great idea. I have no sympathy for them, and I wonder if their enterprise email system is written in Ruby. I mean, they've done a lot of Go recently, so I'm wondering how much of it was Ruby versus how much was Go. But so this is the problem. It's like somebody who's a qualified Java developer writing SQL, really. I can tell you if they started out writing SQL, because you and I both know this, Alan. You know what my Java code looks like. I write decent SQL. I write really bad Java. There's a reason for that. It's not a surprising reason. It's a pretty straightforward reason. But that's again, that's kind of the.
But conversely, if you scroll down to the next section where they said the most loved language, Rust is like 86%, but it's only like 0.9 or 0.4% on the top one.
Well,
where's the disconnect?
Yeah, so hold on. Let's go back to that, because that was my. So let me just get to the most loved. Yeah, so we did most popular. So I like that. We're still seeing Java's still up there. Python's reasonably strong. Again, it's a loosely typed language. I don't love it or hate it, but it's okay. I hate indent style languages, but whatever. That's not horrible. But on most loved, you're right. I mean, Rust is this tiny percentage. And then it's what WTF? Like, what is this Rust love affair?
I'm unfamiliar with Rust. What is Rust?
Rust is kind of built it's a C style language. It was built by a guy out of the Mozilla Research Labs, and I think the reason why people that kind of love it is it's one of those ones that's kind of a higher tier language, and the whole concept behind it is it's supposed to be highly concurrent but highly safe at the same time. So while you're dealing with a massive amount of threading and lots of memory, everything is supposed to be very safe to where if you kind of write a Rust program, it works. You don't have to run into those.
Sounds very familiar to what Ada was back in the old days.
Oh,
Yeah,
God.
that whole. I can write threading now and not have to worry about really knowing how to do threading.
That would be Ada.
Oh God, Ada's so ugly. I mean, that's what heavily influenced. Remember, this was a requirement back in the 80s that if you sold to the government had for a while moved to standardize on Ada from COBOL.
Yeah, we were taught it at university, which is why that was our multi-programming language back in the 80s when I went to uni.
Well, that was we had to do it Ada. So this was not to get too wonky, but because it popped up and looking at some old COBOL stuff that in the Java world, if you're making calls to a database, there's going to be a series of methods, right? There's some classes that you can implement, and then there's a series of methods you call to do a query, get back a result set. It's pretty straightforward. It's a call level interface. So I mean, you can literally do the equivalent of db.execute and pass it a SQL string, if you wanted to, right? In the 80s, so Oracle worked that way, but a lot of the other database vendors did not. They had a precompiler. So what you would do is you would put directives in straight SQL with, like in Ingress, it was double hashtags, and you would run it through a precompiler, which would change it to the call level interface. And then that's how a lot of people were supporting Ada that's sort of how SQL worked in COBOL. Is most of the guys did a precompiler and you just embedded the SQL in it, and they just they basically took that and threw it in. It's different. So it's really a funky way to work. I mean, Ada was just a funky language, but you're right. It's
yeah.
I'm guessing that the Rust crew is probably highly West Coast.
Well, I mean, I feel like it's also the case, right? If it's such a small population, it's still one of those cases of like. But I can't. I've never seen it out in the wild in terms of any companies or anything like that. So I feel like the few people that are choosing to do it, they're doing it more as like a hobby,
an academic type sort of exercise.
If you're doing those languages as a hobby, you're doing it because you like the language. So it's going to kind of naturally skew. I feel like the results to say, yeah, the people that are reporting that I do Rust like doing Rust. So I'd almost like to see this graph a little bit different, where it's a little bit more weighted based off of the number of people responding. Because if Rust has such a small amount of people responding to it, most people probably do like it. Whereas when you get into these others where you have a lot more people responding to it, then the accuracy, the percentage is more accurate.
Well, that's where you get the fanboy. I mean, my assumption is that people who come to this, so if we flip to the dreaded for a second, it's either, I think you either bother responding to this Stack Overflow survey because you either love something or hate something, right? So it probably skews either end, right? It's just like, I can't stand that, so I'm going to want to trash it. Versus, I mean, for us, the way we look at it is we're looking at the most popular because I'm loath to let people do something, build some big system in Rust simply because it's such a small percent of the market. It's cool, but like, how do I find the next guy to, or next gal to edit that? It's too risky from a investment technology standpoint.
No surprise to see Visual Basic at the top of the dreaded list.
Oh, let's go. So we went from Love. So Rust. So the top 5 on Loved is Rust, TypeScript, Python, Kotlin, and Go. I'm surprised that Julia and Dart are in the top.
Dart's starting to make a wee bit more of a. I see it pop up in my feeds a lot more. Go is always there, so is Kotlin, because I'm part of the Java community, so that's always the darling on that front. But yeah, Julia I don't see that often in my circles.
I mean, if you're old enough like I was to own a Dodge Dart, you would never
name it.
Use anything that's Dart. Just FYI, it's a horrible car. Okay, dreaded.
Surprised to see assembly there. I would wager that not a lot of people are actually doing assembly.
Yeah. If you're doing assembly, I'm sure you're not loving it.
I don't even think they're teaching it at school anymore, are they?
I mean, when I was going, it was, but I mean, it's been a while now too, so I don't know.
Well, my son's going through Edinburgh at the moment, and he's not being taught assembly.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they gave up on, it's interesting because I just went down this, So dreaded. I didn't see COBOL on dreaded, which is interesting. I mean, the top 5 in dreaded are VBA, Objective C, which I think the whole transition between Objective C and Swift has caused a lot of this Objective C hate. I mean, I don't love it, but most of my objections to Objective C was just so tied to the Xcode environment. I'm just not a IDE type of person, so I'd rather have a really good editor. Like I kind of shifted over entirely to Visual Studio Code, right? And so I worry about an IDE that does too much for you. People just don't know what it's doing. We saw a lot of that with Visual Studio, right? So, but I'm guessing that's the hate on Objective-C. Perl, look, we all know.
I can see Perl still being one of those things that is driving a lot of DevOpsy stuff, ETL type programs that people just have to maintain, and they're thinking, oh, good God, what am I trying to? I'm scared to touch this thing in case it breaks.
Well, I think most of those guys that were looking at Perl was their DevOpsy kind of scripting language that moved over to Python. I feel like that's kind of the way it's going. But so we've had a couple portfolio companies over the years that have had Perl, and when I've had a couple of really top Perl developers look at it, and their code reviews are always the same. Well, that's one way to do it. The community is so they don't criticize, and there's just so many ways to do things in Perl. Nobody says, well, this is the best way. It's like, well, that's a way to do it. And, you try and pull out of them in a good way. Is that the best way? Is it maintainable? It's like, so I'm not surprised that if you get stuck editing some Perl, good Lord, right?
Reminds me of that Gandhi quote. What do you think of Western civilization? Sounds like a good idea.
Exactly. So assembly. So you're looking at this. If I look up at the top, the Objective-C probably because of the changeover to Swift. I think if you have to do so, there's still some things you can only do in Objective-C that you can't do in Swift. There's still some APIs that Apple has imported. So I get it. If you have to drop down to Objective-C when you've been using Swift, which is a little higher level, that probably is why it's so high in the scale. But VBA for sure. If you get stuck trying to fix somebody's god-awful VBA macro in Excel, you might want to kill yourself, or them probably. Perl, same thing. It's probably mostly maintenance stuff. Assembly, got to be somebody's like, well, we got to fix this, and it's written in assembly. Good luck, Billy. Good luck, Sue. You're doing it. You picked the wrong Jira ticket.
Yes. And both assembly and C, you're being forced to manage your own memory, which in today's languages, you just don't have to worry about freeing and allocating memory. So I can see that tripping up a lot of modern day developers.
Yep.
Pointers, get into pointer hell.
Yeah. I like this star thing. It makes my code look beautiful.
Malachi.
I throw in an ampersand every so often just to,
We used to do the, instead of the MALLOC, if you're a Stephen King fan, Malachi. Yeah, memory management can definitely be children of the corn, especially because it's it is like the bicycle tire. Is this flat or does it just need a little air? Then you take that bike out, so that program slowly leaks memory until your machine crashes. Like, that's the problem with memory management, right? Because typically it's a slow leak. It's not a god-awful crash, right?
Well, I actually came up the other week. I was talking to somebody and said, no, it's actually passed by reference, not by passed by value. And so, they kind of looked at me with the sort of, okay, teaching moment.
Right. Do you know the difference?
Well, no, they didn't, and that was the point.
No, I know. Well, and that was Fortran was always passed by, mostly passed by value language. Although you could pass, later versions could pass by reference. So when you, and that, by the way, boys and girls, is what I hate about languages like Ruby, because you could actually fill a variable with a line of executable Ruby code and it will execute it. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, even though you're not doing memory management, gets, oh God, no. How do you debug that? So
because you have the power doesn't mean you should use the power.
Right. So since we talked about databases before, so skip down to where the loved and dreaded databases are.
Okay, hold on. Where am I on my list? Most loved and web frameworks, libraries and tools, most loved wanted databases. Okay, so loved Redis. I guess.
I thought it was more of a caching layer myself,
I do
but
too,
okay.
right?
Well,
But so I guess
I mean, it's got
maybe
some persistence to it. I mean, I know more people are starting to shove it in there, especially with yes, a lot of people are using it as cache, but like with sessions and stuff, it's so needed for like a web layer to especially keep things fast. That and it's easier to use than I would say the likes of like a memcache. Like
Yeah.
you get a lot more features, it's easier to scale.
was surprised to see Elasticsearch as high as it was.
I'm not.
I know,
yeah,
but from a logging perspective, yes.
Right.
But as a persistent database,
yeah, no, right. But this is the same problem. This is the same problem that they did with the languages. Look, they really should have, cache, cache, relational, NoSQL, other kind of categories, right? Because really, am I making a purchase decision or an implementation decision between Redis and Postgres SQL, which are the first two?
no.
I shouldn't be, right? I may use one, the other, or both, right? But one is not a replacement for the other, right? And so this is the problem.
But you're not going to have your system of record or system of truth in Elasticsearch. I
Yeah,
don't
but I
think
think
so.
it goes back again towards use case. Like I think Elasticsearch, while we tend to use it a lot for logging, there is a strong use case for it for searching, and there's a lot more searching that's being done on data nowadays, and being able to visualize it.
But the data's elsewhere as well.
Usually I would say it's going to be a replication of it. But I think when you start talking love, there's a certain feature set that comes into these things. Like I can definitely say with Redis, Elasticsearch, while we don't see them a whole lot outside of those use cases, the documentation is very well done. They've both now gotten into the spot where just like all these other big RDS databases, you can run them in AWS cloud and that sort of stuff without worrying about managing the actual server infrastructure. So there's a lot of ease to using them now, which makes the whole being able to love them a lot easier to swallow than it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm objecting to the way they present the data. The categorization is too big a bucket, right? So somebody looks at this and says, okay, some executive, right? Some executive says, okay, we got to have a persistent data store for our new application. What should we do? Well, from Stack Overflow, it says Redis should be our should be our database.
On that, S3 should have been in that list by that definition.
Right.
Wasn't that fun?
So if we skip, the surprising thing is, most so loved, Postgres SQL. I get it.
Surprised MySQL isn't in the front top 5, but fair dues.
Yeah, I mean, I think MySQL it's no surprise it's falling below MariaDB, right? Because MySQL's got the Oracle stank on it. I think everybody constantly worries what Oracle's going to do. I mean, it's the ex-MySQL guys are the MariaDB guys, right? So it's MariaDB without Larry Ellison's yacht. It's probably good, right? So Firebase is an odd one. That's
Google's little, but it's being used a lot for mobile stuff.
Is it?
Yeah, for catching analytics and just basically being that place to park something very easily, and Google will worry about the syncing behind the scenes.
Now,
so I think more of a convenience thing as opposed to there's not really much else in this space that does as well as Firebase.
I love that IBM DB2 made it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the bottom entry.
It is, but it does very well in the dreaded list.
Let's get to dreaded. It's the bottom of loved, the top of dreaded.
Yes.
Here's the top 5 dreaded: DB2, Oracle, Couchbase, Cassandra, and MySQL.
See, I would say that Cassandra, to Ryan's point earlier, it's the setting up of the beast.
Cassandra is one of those ones I feel like a lot of people, it seems very appealing on the outside in terms of what it can do. And then you kind of get into the trenches with it, and it is a beast to make sure you're doing it properly. And I think it's also one of those databases, you think you're doing it right, and then the minute you realize you've done it wrong, it's a lot of work to undo the wrong.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the professional developers, most popular, right, database, then your MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, SQLite, MongoDB. That feels like it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
From if you're going to pick if you've got a lightweight SQL data store, SQLite makes sense. If you're trying to do NoSQL, Mongo's although Mongo's recent licensing changes could change this, but it has been the most popular. And then you're trying not to pay Oracle or IBM the DB2 and Oracle money, so MySQL, Postgres, and MySQL Server. That makes sense to me. From the numbers make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like in our experience that's what you see the most of, especially running even like some of the smaller shops and that sort of stuff. That it still tends to be the engines that are powering it.
So if we switch gears here,
Mm-hmm.
should we switch gears to web frameworks?
Well,
Most
there's
popular
always
first.
a one we can always agree on, isn't it?
Well, what's really interesting is
Toss
so
the hand grenade in and discuss.
right. So Kevin, it's like okay, they did a better job. I felt like with the web frameworks, like not putting too many cats and dogs in there. But what's hilarious is jQuery's still number one with React slightly behind it. I swear to God, everybody you ask, says, "Oh, we don't do jQuery anymore." Well, clearly somebody's doing it. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's the demise of jQuery has been greatly exaggerated. I think.
I don't think most people realize that the $ is jQuery. I mean, because it's always part of something. It's part of Bootstrap. It's part of. I mean, it's just there. It's part of the framework.
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't think many people are consciously choosing jQuery as the one that they're doing it, but they're bringing it in via another mechanism that they're using, and so that's why it gets on up there.
So you're saying it's a lot like going to a rave concert. You just happen to pick up COVID while you're there. It wasn't the reason to go there, but you just happen to pick it up while you were there. Is that fair?
It's collateral damage.
Yeah. See how I try and talk to the kids. I throw rave in there, like figuring Ryan will understand what that is.
So hip.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. React and Angular, 2 and 3, ASP.NET and Express rounding out the top. Not super surprising. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other,
I'm surprised Spring is as low as it is. Spring is very popular in the Java community. I'm personally not a fan of it, but I would have thought it would have been a bit higher.
Well, you're not a frameworks guy, though, in general.
Right? I'm not, no.
Right.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things, though, is like, while Angular is so high up there, if you take a quick look at the dreaded frameworks, Angular's top of the dreaded list. So it's like there's a lot of it there, but nobody's really enjoying being an Angular.
Well, so the question is this, though. So you make a good point. The question is this, right? On dreaded, is it because the difference between Angular 1 and Angular 2 was so
that's true. It was like two separate frameworks.
Right. So I think that's, and that's one of the, and this is one of our lessons here, right? Is you pick in a framework, you're married to somebody for a while. Like that's a complicated thing to unfold. Now, to be fair, right? Like let's say I built a module, using Angular for some big application, right? That's got a number of modules. I built a module with it. Just because I built the first module with Angular doesn't mean I had to do the second one with Angular, right? That depending on how these connected these things, I mean, you're not mixing stuff on the same page, but you could probably if you were a user of a browser-based application and there were different frameworks with different modules, you might not detect it depending on whether they use some of the UI elements of it that are unique to that thing, but you probably wouldn't detect it. Having said that, that's the biggest problem. That's my biggest problem besides language is letting dev teams pick something that has an uncertain road. You may be building yourself in a lot of tech debt, right?
Because we've seen this plenty of times in various portfolio companies. The flavor of the month, it's quick. It's easy to go off of that flavor quickly and move on to something shinier and newer. But you've still got this code you got to support at the other side of the fence, and it's now okay. We've just created ourselves a whole hodgepodge of back support issues that we need here. And I completely agree. I think one has to let something mature for a while and then jump on it. And I like to think maybe the 3-year, 5-year mark. If it's still around after that, then you could bet the next 3 to 4 years on this thing, because that's how long you've got to think how long is this going to last for.
Yeah, I feel like you need that sort of time anyway, just to build up the community around it. Like it needs to be that maturity, so that because otherwise you're going to be that one person out there where you go and search for something and you're probably not going to find the answer.
Yeah, well, and that's what we see. So it's one, it's you might not find the answer. Two, it may not get supported. People may fall out of love with the framework itself. So versions of operating systems begin to break stuff, or you end up debugging somebody else's code. I would I mean, Alan, you and I know we've seen this game many times. I mean, the way I answer this is not that. I mean, I don't want to fight with some developer who says, I think pick yours. If we go to Love, let's see what's at the top of Love. That's something that might be so ASP. I don't know, Express or Vue.js or Gatsby. I don't. It's not so much. Hey, this might be the best framework. I agree, it's amazing, but there's just too much risk from is it going to stand the test of time, and can I find people besides you, right? Because I always throw it in the category of, I don't want you, development team, I don't want you to be married to your desk 24 hours a day because you're using some exciting new technology that there just isn't enough people in the world that know it, right? I want to be able to hire people that know it, can understand it relatively easily. I'm not debugging somebody else's code. That's really the issue. It's not that, hey, I'm thrilled that you love this thing, but from a business standpoint, too risky.
Yeah, I got burnt in the old days when I jumped on the SWT bandwagon because I wasn't a big fan of Swing in the Java world. It was SWT. I was doing a lot of stuff in SWT, and then after a while, I was looking up something. I found this great Google article, and it took me halfway through it to realize it was my own article I was reading. Oh shit! I did do scroll bar events. Nobody else had come across this shit. I'm still the top article in Google for this one.
That's pretty funny, actually. And the funny part was you probably hadn't even finished, and you were writing a scathing commentary to what a dumb nut job. Get your head out of your arse, as they say. And then you realize it's you. Damn it. It's like the whole never-ending story, like worlds collide.
Hoisted by my own petard. Right.
All right. Should we
Where are we going next?
Should we talk operating systems?
Oh yes. That should be only two horses in that one.
Well, so if you're looking at I'm looking at popularity, right?
Okay.
Is that where I'm going? I'm looking at so it's still Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and BSD.
Are we still under the most popular tech?
Yeah, I think I'm on most. I'm on most loved.
Oh yes, I see it now.
Yeah.
I see it now.
Yeah. Well, so I guess they don't go to Dread on that one. They just go to they're saying what are the primary operating systems that people are using? Still, 45% Windows, Mac OS is 27.5%, Linux based is 26%. I guess I'm surprised at the number at how high the Mac OS one is. Personally.
I feel like there's still a pretty big population out there that
from a development point of view, yes, but from a production point of view.
No, this is a production. This is the question is developers' primary operating system.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. I'm in a different
Yeah.
category. Sorry.
Yeah. If you're
Pause for station identification.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. I mean, it is. It's going to be really interesting because I don't know if you guys. I know you're
Explains
not.
Why I'm reading Docker here. Then okay.
Yeah, you're really committed if you're running Docker as your desktop operating system. You are a committed Docker. Interesting that there's no proprietary, not surprising, no proprietary Unix anymore at all. Like no Solaris, no IBM AIX, no HPUX. It's just basically it's Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. That's it, right? With a small smattering of BSD, which are probably the
but
real
it would be
fanatics.
nice to break out what the Linux stuff was like, Ubuntu versus Red Hat, etc. Because we're seeing a lot of distros, because we do a lot of virtual machines now for each of our portfolios to keep data separated and keep configurations separated. And every time we spin up a new one, we're always reevaluating and saying, Ubuntu's still the king in terms of support and just general documentation.
I would guess that they didn't, because if you want to start a vicious cat fight, getting people arguing over their favorite Linux distro is really a great way to
because they go down to version numbers. They just stop at the
it just becomes you can see the
1804 was a classic.
Yeah, all the that was almost Sean Connery right there. That's pretty good. The all uppercase, you must be crazy if you use .7.9.12. Yeah. But I'm surprised as a development platform. Mac OS is I'm a Mac guy, but I get pulled into it for other reasons. Interesting yesterday that if you sat through the WWDC thing, which I know you two did not because you're not fanboys.
I was just reading from your tweets what was going on. I could feel the anger and the frustration.
Yeah, well, the anger was that basically, Craig Federici and mostly Craig. It's like, this is awesome, amazing, fantastic. Like, can the buzzwords, like, just tell me what the feature is, right? I'll decide whether it's good or amazing or whatever. But going to their own chips and booting Intel, this is going to be really interesting because my argument is not that.
So they've gone to their own chips, not to ARM.
They're going to their own chips. Yep. So, because they bought a chip manufacturing company, and it was interesting because I started with an iPod, which I synced with Music Match on Windows pre-iTunes Store. I really liked that device, and then the System 10, if you call it, the first sort of new complete rewrite, the BSD based stuff that they inherited from Next. But a Mac wasn't even an option until they shifted to Intel. And I spent the first 2 years basically booting into, running dual boot and booting into Windows on a Mac and using the Mac on the weekend because I was starting to manage, media that way. And, Anna's a fine arts painter. She uses Photoshop. And, here's a tip for you folks that are married. If your spouse is an artist and they're using Photoshop on a Mac to, lay out canvases and plan what they're going to do, because canvases are expensive and the printer and network won't work. And they say, can you fix the printer and network? And your response is, get a real computer. I hope that you're sleeping. I hope you have a really nice sofa because you'll be sleeping on it for periods of time. But I basically booted into Mac OS on the weekends, just doing that kind of stuff, getting used to it, right? But I wouldn't have even considered it without the Intel. I mean, couldn't be a work machine for me without being able to boot into Windows. Now the world has drastically changed. I don't keep. I used to keep parallels. Copies of Windows VMs for my portfolio companies. Now I don't bother. I just spin up something in Amazon and I keep it there. Like, why burn space on my desktop? Why burn? I mean, I've got good internet everywhere. And if I've got something going, I can just disconnect from it. It's right in the state it was. I don't have to shut it down, all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah. And as we've discovered, because we use workspaces and the same thing, we can hand it over to somebody else and say, hey, can you just go and configure this for us and come back in again? I mean, it's a beautiful way of doing that.
It's a beautiful way of doing it. So so it'll be interesting. I mean, so they're going to, that to me is what made the re-explosion of the Mac was once you're on an Intel port, it was easier for third-party developers basically to port their stuff to your platform. Right now they're going back the other way. Now they've got Rosetta 2, which is their compatibility layer. They're going to kind of VM the same thing, but it's going to be interesting because I don't think it's, they're claiming they can just pick the stuff up and run it there, but boy, that's going to be really interesting from a compatibility standpoint, because I've got a lot of stuff that I run on my Mac that's like, I can't afford to buy a new Mac that doesn't run that stuff right away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not, it's going to be interesting.
Well, it's like how Windows 10 does Windows XP support. They've just shipped a Windows virtual machine inside of Windows 10.
Right. But the odds of that working, I mean, that was the biggest problem of, in my opinion, this is the biggest problem of the Mac environment was nothing was ported to it. So, if you had a real professional programming job or were dealing with technology, you had to run Windows. All right. How about
next?
Should we go to collaboration tools? I think we're winding down here.
I think we are.
Well, I think while we're on kind of the concept of OSs, the platforms that are actually, that was what people are developing on. What they seem to be launching them on, though, is dominantly Linux and Docker, which
makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the license there now. I am looking at the log.
And Docker is 90% Linux underneath the cover. You don't ship a Windows Docker, do you?
I mean, you can. I mean, that's the whole thing.
I know you can, but
I don't know how many people are doing it. You get into the whole
it's like I'd really like to give Microsoft more money that they don't need. So let me just go ahead and use their operating system, pay them the fee for that, especially server edition, because that's the absolutely smartest way to do it.
With Docker, you could run 6 Windows machines on a single server, so then you can really add up the license costs. But I think another one that I found interesting in the love is Kubernetes is right behind Docker, and I don't know how I feel about that.
Well, I think Kubernetes is going through the same problem that Hadoop went through. Everybody thought they needed Hadoop until they actually spun it up and figured out how complicated it was to run.
Yeah.
Like AWS has now just introduced their Kubernetes service, which takes away a lot of logistics associated with it. So it's probably going to get, but you got to have a lot of machines before the benefits of that kicks in.
Well,
Right,
I mean,
but that's got to be you're chasing what does Netflix do, right?
Yeah.
It's like, guys, you're not Netflix. I mean, this is the argument I have with, we can't use a relational database for this because Facebook can't use it for their. It's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure lower mid-market accounting system for dentists that's single tenant. I'm pretty sure you're not going to have the traffic that Facebook has.
When we get to that problem, the budget may be there.
Yeah.
yeah. But on the dreaded side, WordPress is still up there, so people are still hating on WordPress, which is reassuring.
Well, we have seen WordPress used in many weird and wonderful scenarios, and you sort of look at it and you're thinking, okay, that you should be commended for doing that with that.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I mean, we've been dealing with this. You remember that was kind of the way back in 2008. That was the Royal. Remember Dave Murray was super high on WordPress. What a brilliant, and I get it. It's a clever. I mean, basically you've got a framework to run a whole website or portal written in PHP, and you can make your own extensions to it.
It was a sneaky way to run the PHP app without having to worry about running a PHP app.
Right. Yeah. But it's, I mean, there's so many third-party contributions to it, and you're buying these PHP plugins that may or may not be secure. I mean, I can get it if you get in a mess of, that was when we first spun up the ParkerGale website. Devin wanted a custom template, and we did it at this point. It's long enough ago. We did it at Rackspace. We spun up our own server. Within half an hour of going live, we were under massive attack because there's so many known endpoints, the XML RPC, gateway. There's so many basic stuff. So we had stuck the CloudFront. Is that the right, guys? Cloudflare in front of it, just to get some breathing room. And then we shifted over to Squarespace because we didn't need to be running our own infrastructure for that stuff anyway. That was sort of a first pass thing that we did. But it just goes to show you, it's got such a footprint of, you spin something up in WordPress, every hacker in the world's like, oh, wonderful. Because
we've got a new one.
Yeah, there's so many holes in it that you just can't stand. So it's not surprising.
I think the one that I'm a little bit surprised to see on the list, just in terms of just seeing it there, not necessarily that I agree or disagree with it, is number 4 on Reddit would be Slack apps and integrations. Like the fact that so many people are building Slack applications and integrations just shows the prevalence it's kind of embedded into the workplace at this point. Like I think a lot of people now are shifting to some of these other ones like Teams, but yeah, I was not expecting to see effectively people hate building an application for a third-party chat thing. Like that to me is rather surprising.
Yeah, you know what? Should always be the cool project, the one that the fun one.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's where. So that's an interesting point. Let me theorize on where we may see that, right? Because I think the same thing is true with Zapier, right? Zapier is like everybody's favorite, integrate two software products that weren't meant to be integrated, right?
Yeah,
I think.
That's like the IFTTT.
Yeah. So here's the two places where I could see people hating on it. First of all, there's if you're really going to integrate two applications, is that the way to do it, right? And so you end up with scalability problems and reliability problems. To me, it looks like a hack, right? And on the Slack side, I would say two things. One, you're dealing with everybody else's hack, and your end users may be the ones that hate you for your working on this. Like, because the extreme versions are, as soon as a message is posted in Slack, it's creating a Jira ticket for you and calling your cell phone, and if you're Liz Lemon's boyfriend from 30 Rock, they're binging your pager. It's just I could be I could see how you'd be hating on this constant on thing. Do we really need to integrate all these things together, and do we really need this instant notification? And I think that's probably why it's Now, interestingly enough, on the who uses what on the collaborative environment, GitHub's number 1, Slack is number 2, Jira number 3, Google Docs number 4, GitLab number 5. And then it's sort of layered products, Confluence, Trello, Teams, Azure, which one of these things is not like others. One of these things just isn't the same. Yeah. Facebook Workplace.
I was going to say,
developers.
we haven't bumped into anybody using workplaces.
No, that's got to be just Facebook employees right there. Not surprising.
Now, what is a little bit surprising in that one, because, we've been using the Visual Studio, the Visual Code live share now, and it's basically like Google Docs for coding. So your IDE can now have other developers come in, and it's wonderful for code reviews and just generally getting a little bit of help.
Yeah.
And that community is quite active. So I was half expecting that to start to bump into this list, but
I think they'd have to be getting more into the IDE space at that point, because that's more of a. So that way you get that to work is if I feel like you're a Visual Studio Code user. Is the only way you're going to bump up against that. So in this environment where a lot of people are working remote, as we've.
Also, I mean, it's that killer feature that says, because an IDE to a developer, it's a very personal thing. Once you get into it and loving it, you don't move from it. Mm-hmm. But that is one of the few killer features of the past years that have come along that says, actually, I'm going to spin this bad boy up.
Yeah.
So here's last category. It's salaries, right? So if you start, what language is associated with the highest salaries? United States. Scala number 1 at 150. Go number 2 at 140. Objective-C at 135. Kotlin at 130. Perl at 130. Just rounding out the top 10, Ruby 130, Rust 130, C 125, Swift 125, Haskell 121. Yeah.
I feel like this is a direct proportion to what we were looking at earlier in terms of popularity of the language, like how many people are actually using it.
Yeah, Rust was only like 0.8%.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Like, so this comes back to the whole conversation of, you can leap into the newest technology, but because that ecosystem is so small, you're going to pay a premium for the talent to get to it because there's not many people in that space.
Right. So this becomes between these languages. It's are you telling me that this is the only language or the best language to solve this problem? And when I say best, it's got to be, there's got to be reasons why it's significantly better than choice number 2 if the price is different, right? Like if you're, why are you doing something in Go unless you're, working for Google? Does it have to be done in Go? Because, now there's I can see, Go is trying to make their mark, right, in being a completely compiled language, right? So, and it's a type safe language, compiled, native application, right? So you're getting a native exe on that environment, and it should be faster, right? I think people are saying the head-to-head between something done in Go and something done in Python will be much faster in Go. I would argue, depending on what it is, because they're each good at their own thing. But saying we have to do this in Go, my argument is, really, I don't think so. But
I'm always a bit suspicious of these payment ones. There's only 8,000 people responded to this one, but I don't know you, but anytime there's a what's your wealth or what's your stuff, I always go these 2 levels above what I really am. Just I never tell the truth in these ones.
Right, but even here it's because yours would be Java, now maybe JavaScript, and 4, no less than 4 venti signature hot chocolates a day. That's your pay scale, and so it's you're pretty easy. But if you look at global, numbers are radically different, but scale is still pretty far up there. But Perl is number 1.
Yeah, but where's COBOL? And I'm not saying that to be flippant. We've seen so much in the press of where COBOL developers are in demand because of and you wrote an article, Jim, regarding.
Yeah. Well, I'm in the middle of, so interestingly enough, I am in the middle of a deep dark hole of, in the 5 minutes we've got left, the deep dark hole of COBOL. That based on this, I started researching. All right, let me step back. I don't think we should be putting the 20-somethings into learning COBOL, because I do think there's a finite end to this, right? We keep thinking the end is farther out. IBM is, the mainframes they're shipping today look nothing like these. You show these old pictures. I had somebody tweet me. They were so mad. I was showing like a 1960s picture of a mainframe, and the new ones are, sleek looking. It's like the old Battlestar Galactica Cylons versus the new Battlestar Galactica Cylons. But yeah, there's a class of problem that, there's still banks, insurance companies, airlines that are still using these back ends. I get it. A lot of state and local government, because it didn't need to change. They just put a web front end on it. But yeah, I think if you're teaching some 23-year-old, COBOL, in 10 years, I just think that market's probably done, right? And then you've got somebody who's 33 years old, has got to learn something new. I'm a believer that most software developers have one or two languages in them that they really will be good at. And after that, it's very difficult. It's like, trying to speak, 10 foreign languages. Are you really good at all of it? It's really hard to do, right?
Yeah.
But I was on a little, so there's a bunch of guys who make open source emulators for the mainframe that you can run on Windows and Linux. And I spun them up. It's real MVS, kind of crazy.
Wow.
And IBM is a master of the mainframe. So you can enter this, like, it's a competition for students, but you can also enter as just a professional and, learn COBOL, compile it on the mainframe. And, I don't hate it. It's odd. It's definitely odd.
So you've switched from being a competitive fighter to being a competitive COBOL developer. Is that what we've just heard?
Well,
Breaking news.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm working on some more pieces on this, but just in the less than 7 minutes we've got left here, closing out this session. What's interesting is I want to figure out whether you could get access to materials to learn it, because my argument is always, yeah, that's great. I can learn some COBOL syntax, but that doesn't help me with the mainframe. It's all the other things I need to know on the mainframe, right? That, CICS, ISPF, there's a rack app. There's a ton of things you need to know, technologies around it. But it's so odd. Most of your modern languages have a finite number of nouns and verbs, call it around 70, and everything else is libraries. COBOL has like 400 nouns and verbs and no libraries. It's just not, I get it's interesting. The structure of the program is interesting that, with most modern languages, you can do anything any way you want. Here, there's a structure to it. You got to declare all your variables in one place, all your, IO in another place. I get it. It's odd, though. I think if you mastered COBOL, would you be prepared to look at some other language? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, this was fun.
As always.
Same time next year?
Same time next year. Same time next year. I think we didn't dive into some of the other developer profile stuff, but I think, we usually focus on the language, right?
Because it's most relevant to us in the portfolios, because they're making decisions there that have long-lasting tails.
Oh, for sure. All right. Well, always a pleasure, MacLaurin Group. Nice to have you on a podcast, Ryan.
Yeah.
He held his own. It's hard to talk over us, for sure.
For sure.
Hi, gents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.